Welcome to the very first the Nam Center for Korean Studies Colloquium series of this academic year. My name is Youngju Ryu, and I'm Associate Professor of Korean Literature in the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures. It is my very great pleasure to welcome you and also to introduce Professor Hyungki Shin, Professor of Korean Literature at Yonsei University in Korea. Professor Shin is currently a Fulbright Fellow at University of California, San Diego. And when I heard that he had come to the States, then I knew we had to invite him here right away. So I'm glad to report that we are actually, Michigan is #1 on that list. Professor Shin is one of the leading authorities on that very difficult and challenging subject called North Korean literature. Having written 2 canonical volumes on its history, and has also published numerous, and I mean numerous, monographs on such topics as literature of the liberation period, the so-called 3 to 5 year period right after the end of the colonial rule in Korea, and also fascism in literature, as well as books on narratology. Professor Shin's talk today will address the question of narrative in the construction of North Korean statehood, and in particular, how one story came to rule them all, consolidating what he calls the externalized national identity that can then readily inhabit it without demanding spiritual transformation from those who enter that narrative. His talk, I think, will offer an important corrective and add much needed nuance to the common stereotype we have of the North Korean populace as simply brainwashed. He will do this through a reading of a work by a very famous writer named Lee Ki-young. He is one of the very few South Korean writers to have actually crossed over to the North and was not purged. So one of the very few South Korean writers who ended up living his natural life and dying of old age, having survived the vicissitudes of political power in North Korea. As I introduce Professor Shin, I find myself getting a little bit sentimental because many, many moons ago when I was a graduate student, I actually was an exchange student in Korea for a year, and I attended his class. He didn't remember me from then because it was a big class, but his class was the first class in which I got to read literary critical writings from both North and South Korea, and that was revolutionary for me. I don't think he knew at the time, and could certainly have not guessed that a seed of Korean literature that he sowed then would one day take root in the US and in Michigan, of all places. So I'm hoping that he's very, very pleased about that. So, if you will, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Hyungki Shin.
It is great pleasure, it is great honor for me to have a lecture here in Nam Center. I would like to thank Professor Yu, Professor Kwak, and everyone sitting here today. Thank you. Here goes. Now I'm saying English, but as you will see, English is a very inconvenient language for me. So I have to be cautious when I speak English. Actually, this is the second time to have a lecture with English. But I think this might be the way to confront not only English or language, very consciously. So I will start. My presentation, the title of my presentation is, as you see, North Korea, the state built by narrative. In this lecture, I will attempt to examine how the narrative works in the process of building the state, so-called DPRK, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. My conclusion is some narrative played a decisive role in the process, and its effects have worked so far. The most notable one of these was the narrative on the anti-Japanese arms struggle, because the sovereignty, authenticity, and the legitimacy are able to be generated through the anti-Japanese arms struggle narrative. Kim Il-sung wasn't a mere hero of that narrative. Rather, he was the only author for making that narrative itself. First chapter is the puissance, the French pronunciation. Impuissance, puissance, puissance of narrative. The power of narrative actually means. The narrative is the strongest way to store and disseminate an interpretation of the world. Narrative deals with the knowing, the known, the knowable. Hayden Weiss says like that. Based on historical communality, narrative could make people follow the same pattern. Think about the memory or memory about the past or the history. Our memory can be materialized only when it takes a shape of narrative. History also. There can be no history without narration. I can say like this, narrative is a material form of narrative, of history. Then, how do you think about it? What is the historical truth? Historical truth based on fact? Historical fact? Is that the kind of narrative effect? How do you think about it? Then, next page. The narrator has no responsibility to provide an evidence to support narrative's truthfulness. This is a Sir like said like this. We always say about other person. I heard him. I heard somebody doing something. I heard. Oh, really? Then, what is your answer? I heard. That's all. They don't need to provide any evidence to verify the content of somebody's affair. Sometimes narrator induce emotion and empathy so could make their voices sound seriously. Literature is that kind. Poetry, novel, and sometimes something. The sympathy could be developed through narrative, could go beyond rational thinking, as Plato worried about. As you know, Plato wanted to remove poets from his republic because he believes that poets usually evoke inferior emotion, so they may be harmful to young people. Fortunately, Plato has no power. He has no his republic. There can be some narrative which would like to highlight intentionally selected aspect, consequently hide below that, and aim to convey definite message. This kind of narrative is absolutely ideological form. The kind of narrative tend to fix the meaning of its object and construct the world through ideological totalization. In that case, people inevitably identify themselves to this circumstance. Every narrative makes its reader to take a position about the content and attitude that narrator says. In doing so, narrative identity can be formed. In a situation that people's identity have been determined by very influential and binding narrative, like the case in North Korea, the act of positioning will emerge as a struggle to get a better place or a secure share. Because socially allowable and desirable positions are already designated, people can reap or get some benefit when they stand on those spots. People cannot choose undesirable position. If he chooses an undesirable position, he cannot reap. He must be excluded or hanged something. I think ideological imprisonment by narrative have been ongoing for many years in North Korea. Among those narratives, most influential one is anti-Japanese armed struggle narrative. The second chapter. What did anti-Japanese armed struggle narrative do in North Korea? The anti-Japanese armed struggle narrative started to be written just after the liberation of Korea. Actually, this narrative was already known to everyone, to every Korean, because it showed the way to redeem national sovereignty. After the liberation of Korea, maybe you already know, 1945, August 1945, August 15th. After liberation of Korea, restoring the national sovereignty became a common goal. Most Koreans who survived laboriously but couldn't recall a memorable past because he had to survive under the Japanese regime, have to establish a genuine identity. He changed it. He need to change them. They need to change themselves. They are not people of Japanese empire. They renew. They have to renew. They have to innovate. They have experienced that the national identity can be guarded only by strong sovereign power. The anti-Japanese armed struggle narrative makes people imagine the actual existence of sovereign power. Anti-Japanese armed struggle narrative contains many stories fought against the Japanese troops, and in that stories, General Kim always killed many Japanese soldiers very easily. So when people read that narrative, they might have some pride. They're proud of that story and join to that story, want to join, maybe. Kim Il-sung was one of the famous heroes of that narrative, but in the newly written anti-Japanese armed struggle narrative in northern Provence, Korea was divided 38 line, north and south. South region of Korea was militarily dominated by American troops, and above a 38 line, Soviet troops was dominated by Soviet troops. Northern Provence means above 38 line. And any other heroes could not be described. It means Kim already got special status politically. Kim was called general. When Kim Il-sung was introduced to people, people calls him general, big general, 사령관. 사령관 means what? Commander. Anyhow, who have fought against Japanese invasion and gained victory. By admiring his achievement, people could fulfill their vicarious narcissism. That's my word, vicarious narcissism. How do you think about this? From the traditional and nationalistic point of view, there can be competing readers. But most notable thing is that Kim sees the socialist interpretation of democracy. Democracy, Korean pronunciation is 민주. Democracy was master signifié, which represent the new era. Master signifié is a word actually void, empty, so able to contain all the earnest wishes, expectations. So democracy actually void, but contains many meanings, many wishes of many people's wish, contains earnest and desperate wishes of people that period. What is that wishes? To be liberated, to have some big money, to have like that. The democracy asserted by Kim also means new regime will be governed by people. However, in the narrative, Kim appeared as a sole savior who liberated Korean people from the imperialistic oppression. He became ultimate author of narrative itself and could become the author of new era of democracy. Kim Il-sung, could be the subject of sovereign power and could get authenticity because he secured national identity. Furthermore, he could gain legitimacy of the rule because he liberated people. All that was proceeded through narrative. Narrative, anti-Japanese armed struggle narrative. Chapter 3, land reform. Land reform was occurred in March in 1946. The law of land reform proclaimed March 5th, and people said the land reform finished within 20 days. Just 3 weeks, land reform was finished. The land reform done by unpaid expropriation and the distribution was a meaningful event, most meaningful event, I think. Because it realized the promise of anti-Japanese armed struggle narrative. In other words, land reform could be accepted as a significant historical victory of heroic struggle. Because land reform liberate people, liberate class. Landowners have to escape from northern Provence. They ran away to south. Actually, the vestige of colonial regime was rapidly liquidated through land reform. The authenticity and legitimacy of sovereign power represented by Kim were verified. In novels or reportage written after land reform, Kim was eulogized as a deliverer who distributed whole land to every peasant evenly. Many peasants could not help but think that they were really salvaged by land reform. No matter how difficult it was, they had to return this favor. They wrote, they wrote rather with their blood and sent to Kim Il-sung. And in the document of committee of document of People's Committee, when they have a meeting, 혈지가 답지했습니다. The blood rather nearly comes. And they stopped the meeting and read the paper, read it rather. Most peasants rarely expected to own their land. Finally, the dawn of new era has now been opened. All they thought like that. Land reform must become the turning point that jump over the everyday life of the past. Let's take a close look at Lee Gi-young's short story, 개벽. 개벽, the Korean word 개벽, the Chinese word 개벽, all means the opening. 개 means opening, 벽 means opening. Opening a new world, opening a new sky. So I translate 개벽, dawn, dawn of the new era, which describes the first step of rebirth. 개벽, dawn, the physiognomy of discrimination.
Sorry, was that Kim? Is that Kim there?
No, that's not it.
That's Lee.
Sorry?
개벽, dawn pictured old peasant, 원첨지. 첨지 means just the affiliation, just the title. It's a humble title. Who doubted the effectiveness of land reform because he has lived oppressed life for a long time. He is accustomed to show a servile attitude. He is a kind of abject. You know the abject Christeba's word, abject, piece of shit. Yes. So when the landlord asked him, why you didn't join to rally, welcoming landlord, and in that novel, the people's rally welcoming landlord, 우리에게 땅을 주신 김일성 장군 만세, Holley, the General Kim, who gave us the land. But 원첨지 didn't join. Because landlord asked him, why you not didn't join that rally? He answered like below. 원 주사님도 그게 다 무슨 말씀입니까? What are you talking about me? I'm not that kind of person. 아니 저를 여태 그런 사람으로 아셨나요? Do you think of me like that? 원첨지는 기가 막혀서 억울한 심정을 하소하려는 듯이 마주 쳐다보았다. This is a servile attitude. It's a protection of abject. Abject always, there's no way to accept servile, dishonest, and ugly. The land reform was unbelievable news he dared to expect. It is a matter of course that he afraid and fears doubt. people might read their fears. Other peoples, other peasants might read their fears and skepticism too from 원첨지's face. Actually, 원첨지's face represents many peasants' doubt. But this kind of identification should be developed to discrimination of the desirable and undesirable, since nobody should not stay in dark past. Everyone must be renew themselves. People could renew themselves by casting away negative vestige of past coiled up in the heart of themselves. I think this kind of self-discrimination was inevitable in the course of reading. This kind of discrimination could have forced people to stand on the desirable side. In fact, there was no other choice. To stand on the desirable side by the act of discrimination was the aim of 교양 culture that every people in North Korea must learn at that time. 뭐 이게 또 나오는군요. It is a part of that novel. How can I say this? I can translate this. 아니 내가 위헌 제목이 되느냐? 이 사람 나는 제발 빼주게. 공연히 누굴 죽이려고 해? When the committee member asked to 원첨지, you should one of the representative new committee that assured the land reform. He afraid. 원첨지 afraid. You try to kill me? 누굴 죽이려고 해? You try to kill me? I'm afraid about that. Very delicate and double-minded. One side he actually greet the land reform, but the other side he afraid the abrupt change. To stand on the desirable side seems like a result of moral judgment because desirable and undesirable divided by a moral term. One is good and evil, morally decent and bad, like this. But actually it was a choice for survive because, as I said before, people cannot choose undesirable side because if we choose desirable side, he cannot reap it in there. So if he afraid to be purged, he have to choose desirable side. That's not a choice. There's a mandate. Because whether to be included or excluded from the 장군님의 누리, world of general. 누리 means periphery, world, like that. Near the general. We have to attach it to near the space, the general. If we alienate from that area, we might be very dangerous. Words of general was determined by which side they would be on. 원첨지 may well represent common features of peasant, but his ugly figure must be discarded. Soon, 원첨지 also recognized world change. The process that he is transforming himself characterized the reality of land reform. General Kim have opened a new era by giving rent to peasants. So all the peasants who received the rent must return his favor by renewing themselves. The immediate and faithful responsiveness, I translate it from 감응. 감응 means, here it is. Responsiveness is empathy, feel emotion. This means. So, if you are human, you have to feel. You have to have emotion. Thankful emotion to General Kim because you already received the rent from him. So you have to respond. Become their task. Responsiveness had become their task. Chapter 5, the sovereign power and physiognomy. I think after Gabyok done, North Korean literature start to construct a frame of physiognomy that discriminate the positive and the negative through representing the characters. Physiognomy from the Greek physis means nature, and gnomon meaning judge or interpreter is assessment of people's character or personality from his or her outer appearance, especially the face. The literary portrait depicted in literary work could be seen from the view of physiognomy, insofar as his or her outer appearance interact with the characters or immanent figures. I could not find out any trace of difficulties of representation or writer's agony in reading Gabyok. Gabyok is very clear and apparent. That is very impressive. But sometimes many writers have feel agony to express the represent the image or say something. When they say something, is that right, or is that really like this? They feel some agony or skepticism. That means the difficulties of representation. 재현의 난관. That means in Korean word. I don't think he is a writer of special belief. Rather, I think he knew full well writing narrative is the way to strengthen the ideology and by so doing create power. That's why that is the reason Lee Ki-young can read till 86 or 84. The physiognomy of discrimination can be activated when people need to judge other person. When a shopkeeper need knowledge about physiognomy, when people come in, he have to discriminate. He has whether he has money or not, whether he has the intention to buy something or not. Shopkeepers are real judge of physiognomy, or okay. And it might work also when people look back themselves. The intellectual physiognomy of literary portrait can be mirror that makes people reflect themselves, because it makes people to search a suitable position which satisfies social mandate or moral order. So physiognomy of discrimination closely related to choose a desirable choice of desirable position. Narrative identity means the identity that might be formulated in the process of positioning. As you think, so the process of discrimination is a very important step for making narrative identity. In the circumstance that every person have to reveal the determinable face. Isn't it funny? Every person have to reveal the determinable face. Very clear, apparent face to read it in there, and must stand at the assured position. The process of making narrative identity can be induced to ready, fixed, or limited way. There's no choice. There's no freedom to choose. In that case, in this case, the literary portrait could not help but functioning as already discriminated exemplar. 본보기 형상, the Korean word 본보기 형상 means exemplar. The division and arrangement of literary figures by physiognomy become the way of a revelation of sovereign power by representing the shape of 수령, the great chieftain, and his fighters or villains or traitors or etc. The figure of great chieftain, how to figure out the great chieftain is the most important assignment to writers in North Korea also. The division and arrangement of literary figures by physiognomy become, I already read. The division and arrangement of literary figures by physiognomy prescribe the legal and valid form of life. Like this. The figure of chieftain, great chieftain, must be described as a person of the most noblest, greatest, the wisest man in the world. Writers should depict the great chieftain, most noblest, greatest, and the wisest man in the world. Maybe immortal history, the series of novel. The title is Immortal History, 불멸의 역사. That contains great chieftain, Kim Il-sung's revolutionary history. Still now, 34 volumes were already written and just published. Each volume has at least 500 pages, sometimes 800 pages. They published 300,000 copies per each volumes. That kind of the series of immortal history. Still now, the 34 volumes, like this, full of bookshelves, this much thick. That's the some results of this narrative of discrimination. In that novel, the shape of figure of great chieftain was very concretely, very 자세하게 뭐죠? Very in detail. And in the traitor, he's a fighter. This is my epilogue. A society that has lost the sense of past cannot be a society. The past is fallen country, I think. So we have to try to discover or excavate its shattered pieces. I think it is a kind of adventure. Various adventures should be allowed, and its result must be able to discuss sufficiently. That is one of the most important requirements to making society. Or the present will be severely distorted. In North Korea, the anti-Japanese armed struggle narrative sees the past from the early stage of nation building. There can't be any other different past. There can be any discover, excavate, and there can be any debate. North Korean people's misfortune have started from this point, I think. Okay, finished. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have some time for question and answer. I want to ask you to wait until the mic gets to you, because we're actually taping the talk, and we will not be able to hear you in the video if you don't wait. Okay, so any questions?
Thank you, Professor Shin, for a fascinating lecture and presentation. My question has to do with this very early period, the liberation period, and what were sort of the competing narratives, if there were any, and how did, I guess it's a question about distribution and also about how they kept this narrative as the, as you say, it's the undeniable narrative. And it was, I was curious about that, if there were other competing stories that, you know.
You mean there is any competing narratives in there in that period?
Yeah, in that
No.
early.
There is no competing narratives can be written. Just after the liberation period, nobody can write any narratives. They don't know what will happen. They don't know the correct meaning of liberation. Only they know the Japanese soldiers and Japanese regime collapsed. But already in September, the Soviet troops invaded in Pyongyang, and they want to build a new nation. But already Soviet troops accompanied Kim. Kim Il-sung was accompanied with Soviet troops. He was the member of Soviet troops. His grade was major. Then he introduced to peoples, he is a real General Kim. Everybody knows the story of General Kim, but they imagine General Kim is a very old man with white beard and ride a white horse. Then they saw a young, he was born in 1912, so a very young person stand up to the dansang and was introduced that he is a Kim Il-sung, General Kim. people doubt, is he a real Kim Il-sung? But many people said like this, young Kim Il-sung is better than old Kim Il-sung. Because young people, the young man is more powerful, have more strong physical and mental power. I couldn't find out any other competing stories or narratives. I also wonder how it was happened.
But isn't it only in North Korea side?
Yeah.
We learn entirely different.
Yeah,
in South
sure,
Korea
sure.
story.
In South Korea, there can be written that kind of narrative.
I forgot.
So could you talk about the story 개벽 and the story in relation to other works that Lee Ki-hyung later produced on the subject of land reform? Is it similar to those other narratives? Is it different? If so, how? The 원참지 character seems pretty unique.
Okay.
Okay.
개벽 was written at in 19. Maybe I imagine it was written in the period of land reform, maybe March. It was published in July 1946. So only 4 months have passed after passed from land reform. It may take to print that magazine. It may take 4 months. So I can imagine Lee Ki-hyung wrote that novel at the period of land reform just started and ongoing, I think. Then 2 years, 3 years, and Lee Ki-hyung wrote long novel, roman. So 2 volumes would consist with 2 volumes. The title is 땅 in 1948. So 2 years later. In that novel, the protagonist is the hero is Kwak Ba-wi. That means Kwak means our Professor Kwak. It's a surname, it's a family name. Ba-wi means rock. So Kwak Ba-wi means man who likes man who is very strong and strong, physically strong. He catch up 산돼지 뭐라고 그러죠? Wild boar with a stick and cultivate barren land because he is very strong, muscle man, and have a strong will. Kwak Ba-wi is the figure of Kwak Ba-wi is a kind of traditional hero. It's very much different with 원첨지. 원첨지 is a kind of abject. 2 years. In 2 years, what happened? I think Lee Ki-hyung fully understand now what he should do. The character of North Korean regime, the character of North Korean power. So land reform interpreted in that novel very differently. In this point of view, the Gabyok seems very realistic novel because 원첨지 represent many peasants in that period. Actually, many peasants have doubt to land reform, and sometimes some case peasant refuse to receive the rent. Why I receive other man's rent? So some peasant try to return his received rent to landlord because this is not mine. And there's many case. 원첨지 is that kind of person. We can imagine or we can think there are many cases in the process of land reform. Maybe Lee saw that. He described them. So, but after 2 years, he already knew what he should do, what he described. But my English is so poor. I try to explain. Okay.
I mainly had a question in regards to bringing 원첨지 into this light where as you are bringing this narrative in relation with the historical commonality, historical fact, did you find a lot of trouble in sort of making him personifying or making 원첨지 credible in your research, or making sure that he is a valid figure to put into relation to your research in, making this narrative important to understanding North Korea? I hope that makes sense.
I cannot understand you correctly, but
I mean more so.
yeah, I can say like this. Gabyok is very unique case. There's no other novels like this. 이태준 also wrote about land reform, and 이선희 also wrote about land reform. They always describe the heroic peasant or very thankful peasant. But in this case, it's very unique. But many readers maybe 동감하다는 뭐라고 그러죠? Identify or feel is a very so their realistic face from 원첨지. In that, because this novel is very important and have great meaning, I think.
Okay, thank you for interesting your presentation. In early part, you said that narrative has no responsibility to provide evidence, right?
Yeah, sure.
But whenever the South Korea, try to attack the legitimacy of North Korea, they always talking about the evidence, right? So how is that unfair for to do that, or how do you think about it? Yeah.
I wrote some papers, several papers about that. In South Korea, the anti-communist movement is very important social campaign. You ever read the 이북 통신? 이북 통신 means 이북 means above 38 line. 통신 means message. It's a magazine. It was published by his name is 이북. It's a real name. It's not a real name. It's a kind of 필명, 뭐죠? Pen name. He was ran road in North Korea, but he had to run away from North Korea. So he has a very antagonizing, very 적개심으로 가득 차 있었다. 뭐라 그러죠? full of hostility to North Korea, especially to Kim Il-sung. This magazine always contains the atrocities committed by Soviet troops or Kim Il-sung and his men. Many atrocities, rape, killing. They need no any witness. They have no 증거를 제시하다가 뭐였죠? Give no evidence. Only they very 자극적인, very sensational, nearly yellow paper, very sensational. But if you read this magazine, first you are very astonished and surprised, but 1 hour, 2 hours passed. It's funny. It's a kind of cartoon or comic book. I think this 이북 통신 was not have no effect. In case of it's one of special case. Did I answer? My answer is sufficient.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I'm by no means an expert in this field, nor am I familiar with Lee Ki-young and his works. But I had a question about, in thinking about the character 원첨지 and the title of the book, 개벽, is there some sort of reference in the book about 천지개벽 at all? Does it appear, and is there some sort of symbolicism behind or the relationship between 천지개벽, the heaven and earth, and how that represents sort of the land reforms at all? I was just curious.
Yeah, that 개벽 means 천지개벽. Because totally different era now begins. That means so. I think that my translation done is so weak. I have to change my translation. That means from now, from the land reform begins, totally different historical era has begun, because General Kim already decided to give land to every peasant. So real democracy now possible from this period. That means 개벽. So 천지개벽, the same meaning.
Sorry, I had a follow-up question. So I was curious about the initial reception, and you talked about the concept of narrative. I was wondering, so what would be the fine line between narrative and propaganda? Because I would think that maybe some of the things that were in the book might have celebrated or overly celebrated land reform. And this is me having not read the source. But so what do you think in your mind made it a narrative as opposed to propaganda?
There are many kind of narratives. We are living in the many kind of narratives. Actually, we are also narratively constructed subject, because our memory construct narratively. Our world view can be constructed narratively. Our sense of history also can be constructed narratively. Propaganda is a kind of narrative. Propaganda, there's many kind of propaganda, but propaganda means actually means 확산, disseminated Christian faith. In North Korea, in Red China, in Soviet Russia, there is many propaganda. Narrative was the very useful tool of propaganda in the case. I think like that. But we cannot identify propaganda and narrative. Is there anybody who can answer with Korean?
한국어로 했대.
아 예. 제가 지금 기다리고 있는 중입니다. 예.
그 마지막 장면 개벽 씬 3라고 하시는
네, 네.
그 장면을 좀 저는 이제 보고 예전에 읽어가지고 이게 기억이 안 났는데 다시 보니까 굉장히 재밌어서
네.
이거를 이렇게 좀 더 깊게 이렇게 분석을 해주시면 좀 감사할 것 같아요.
네.
So I asked Professor Shin if he could offer some further analysis of this last scene. I had read this a long time ago, and I had forgotten that this scene was there, and it screams out as something that needs to be interpreted a bit further, because it introduces an element in the narrative that seems quite unique. So.
Yeah.
So parts of it are in the English above, but the narrative basically, the scene here, it says, it's a quote. So somebody asks 원첨지, I'm presuming. 김명감
is 머슴 출신. 그러니까 빈농인데 머슴을 servant.
servant.
He was servant in colonial period, but now 김영감 and 원첨지 nominated to
serve in the People's Committee.
People's Committee, member of People's Committee.
So two people who've been asked to serve on the People's Committee. The first person, Kim Young-gam, asks our protagonist Won Chum-ji if he won't accompany him to one of the committees. And Won Chum-ji answers, "Oh, are you going already? Let's go together." And then the narrative continues. It says Won Chum-ji was already sort of feeling uncomfortable, I guess, about going by himself, and he could not go. So he was delighted that there was somebody else who could accompany him to the committee. So he quickly got ready. And then in the next part, this is the last sentence. It basically says that it describes the scene, and it describes more specifically what the two folks look like. So it says that Kim Young-gam, 중대가리, I guess, is referring to shaved head.
Yeah.
So he was, he was bald. So it describes him as this bald man with a traditional, I guess, coat on. And then behind him is our protagonist Won Chum-ji, who, as it says in the English, is wearing a big hat, a traditional hat for men, but he's wearing a very incongruous outfit in that beneath he's wearing a very thick kind of coat that one would expect a Buddhist monk to be wearing. And so the sentence ends by basically pointing out it's almost like a satire, saying that this was a very humorous scene that looked like basically a layman walking behind a Buddhist monk, essentially.
처사 행렬 means kind of clown. 처사, what originally 처사 means man who lived with live under the temple shrine. That means 처사. But 사당패를 뭐라고 그래야 되나요? 사당패. Traveling traveling entertainer, kind of traveling entertainer. It consists of man and woman. Man, 처사 means, 처사 indicate that kind of man. 처사 means, so in this case, they looks like a clown. And funny, ridiculous. Won Chum-ji can be renewed himself? How do you think? The point of view of writer's point of view is really sarcastic in this case. 이기영's view on peasant is, I think, a little bit sarcastic, and he couldn't believe a peasant because peasant is this kind of people. I think he thought. That kind of point of view may be against the land reform, the policy of land reform, or the historical meaning of land reform. That is a very delicate spot in this novel. What the writer Lee Gi-young intended in this page, I think he tried to describe a real page, real scope of already he saw. But sometimes we can think like this. People, when read this one, I won't be like that person. I won't be that kind of ridiculous clown. But I think that is not a 충분한, 뭐죠? Sufficient interpretation. Think about it.
The scene is interesting. I think this is a question you're trying to get at, the Bulgyo element, the Buddhist element. Also the fact that the two men get sort of, there's reduplication and they're sort of incomplete, but when they come together, then they're complete. One has the hoturumagi, that the outer coat that you would probably expect would go with the Confucian hat, the literati hat. The other has bald head, but wearing something that's reminiscent of a monk's robe. So,
the opposite. So the person with the
right, the hoturumagi, right, gentleman's coat, yeah.
But the guy who's wearing the monk's outfit has the gentleman's hat on. So it's a puzzle that didn't fit together properly.
Exactly. So these two people, I mean, what do you make of the fact that they're each kind of given an incomplete association with a particular kind of Korean past?
That can be possible. That kind of interpretation can be possible. They reflect the ugly past. And that kind of past must be thrown away.
But they're not thrown away. Even they find a place within the structure. They are embraced. There's no need to sort of transform them spiritually. The structure can just take them as they are. I think that's interesting.
But that's not a genuine interpretation of land reform. As I said before, that may be against the policy or the already designated meaning of land reform.
Hegemonic meaning.
Yeah, hegemonic meaning of.
Okay, so great. If there are no further questions, then we'll end today's session here. Thank you, Professor Shin. Right. 수고하셨습니다.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.